Hey, welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy tonight's stories. Here we venture into the dark web, peeling back layers of mystery and terror to reveal tales that were never meant to be told. Leave a like and subscribe for more dark web scary stories.
I paid for a dark web guide to summoning spirits. Last night, I heard my dead friend's voice in my living room. I'm not one to mess around with the supernatural. I've always been the guy who laughs at horror movies, calls ghost hunters ridiculous, and rolls my eyes at haunted house stories. But after last night, I don't think I'll ever laugh again. It all started a few weeks ago when I stumbled onto this thread while browsing the darker corners of the internet. I wasn't actively looking for anything creepy. I was just bored, scrolling aimlessly. That's when I saw the title, Summoning Spirits, a Step-by-Step Guide, Real Results. At first I thought it was a joke, but as I read through the post I couldn't stop myself from getting sucked in. The thread was filled with people claiming they'd tried the guide and heard voices, seen shadows, even had conversations with loved ones who'd passed away. Most of the comments were either enthusiastic or flat out terrified. And then there was the link. I don't know why I clicked it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was because of Mark. Mark was my best friend. He died 2 years ago in a car accident, and I still think about him almost every day. We'd been close since high school, like brothers, really. And when he died, it was like a piece of me went with him. So when I saw people in the thread saying they'd used the guide to contact their dead friends and family, something in me shifted. What if it was real? What if I could hear Mark's voice one more time? Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked the link. The site was bare bones. No flashy graphics, no ominous music, just a plain black background with a single paragraph of text explaining the guide. It claimed to be an ancient method refined for the modern era, whatever that means. The price was steep, $300 in Bitcoin, but the reviews at the bottom were overwhelmingly positive. I sat there staring at the screen, my cursor hovering over the Buy Now button. I knew it was stupid. It was probably some scammer selling a bunch of nonsense, and I'd be out $300 for nothing. But then I thought about Mark, about how much I'd give just to hear his dumb laugh again, or have one last conversation about all the stuff we never got to say. So I did it. I bought the guide. The email came almost instantly. It included a PDF attachment with detailed instructions and a list of materials I'd need. Most of it was stuff I already had: candles, a mirror, a notebook. But there was one thing I had to order separately: a small black obsidian stone. The guide called it the anchor, and it was apparently the key to making the whole thing work. While I waited for the stone to arrive, I read through the instructions at least a dozen times. The process seemed simple enough. Place the mirror and the candles in a dark, quiet room. Use the obsidian stone to ground the connection. Write down the name of the person you want to contact. Focus on their voice and repeat a specific phrase written in the guide. The guide emphasized over and over that this wasn't a game. It warned that if you didn't follow the instructions exactly, things could go wrong. There were vague mentions of unintended visitors and opening doors you can't close, but it was all pretty vague. The stone arrived a week later. It was smaller than I expected, smooth and cold to the touch with an almost glassy surface. As soon as I held it, I felt weird. Not scared exactly, but uneasy, like the air around me had shifted. That night, I decided to try the ritual. I set everything up in my living room. The candles cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the mirror sat propped up on the coffee table. I placed the stone in front of the mirror and sat cross-legged on the floor, the notebook in my lap. I wrote Mark's name at the top of the page, my hands shaking slightly as I picked up the guide to read the phrase. "Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling. "If you're there, I'm here. Let's talk again." The room was silent. I waited, staring at the mirror, half expecting to see something or someone staring back at me. But nothing happened. "Mark," I said again, louder this time. "If you're there, let me know." Still nothing. I sat there for what felt like forever, feeling more and more ridiculous. What did I expect? That Mark was just going to appear out of thin air and start chatting? Eventually, I blew out the candles, packed everything up, and went to bed. But then, last night happened. It was just after midnight when I woke up to the sound of something moving in the living room. At first I thought it was just the wind or the pipes creaking, but then I heard it. A voice. "Hey, man." It was quiet, almost muffled but unmistakable. It was Mark's voice. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. "Mark," I called out, my voice cracking. There was no response, just the sound of footsteps crossing the living room floor. I grabbed my phone, its dim light doing little to chase away the darkness as I crept down the hallway. When I reached the living room, it was empty, but the mirror was back on the coffee table, and the candles were lit. The obsidian stone sat in front of the mirror, its surface glowing faintly, almost as if it was alive. "Mark," I whispered again, my voice barely audible, and then from the mirror I heard him. "Why did you call me?" For a second I thought I'd imagined it. The voice was faint, almost like a memory echoing in my head. But as I stood there, staring at the mirror, it came again, louder this time. "Why did you call me?" It was Mark's voice, clear as day, but it wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the mirror. The air in the living room felt wrong, heavy, like the walls were pressing in on me. The candle flames flickered violently, throwing jagged shadows across the ceiling. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. "Mark," I stammered, my voice shaking. "Is that you?" For a moment the mirror was still. Then the surface rippled, like water disturbed by a pebble, and I saw it. Mark's face. It wasn't like a normal reflection. It was off, like looking through warped glass. His features were there, the crooked smile, the way his hair always stuck up at weird angles. But his eyes were wrong. They were darker, sunken, almost hollow. "You shouldn't have called me," he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. "You opened the door." "What door?" I asked, taking a step closer. He didn't answer. Instead, the image in the mirror flickered, replaced by something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. The reflection wasn't just Mark anymore. Behind him, shadows moved, twisting and writhing like living smoke. Shapes emerged from the darkness, faces, half-formed and distorted, their mouths moving soundlessly as they pressed against the glass. "Who are they?" I whispered. "They're not here for you," Mark said. "They're here for me." I felt a sudden rush of guilt. Whatever I'd done, whatever I'd summoned, it wasn't just affecting me, it was affecting him, too. "I just wanted to talk to you," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't mean to—" "You don't understand," Mark interrupted, his tone sharp. "The guide. It's not what you think. It's not just a way to talk to the dead. It's a beacon. It draws them in." "Them?" The shadows behind him pressed closer, their distorted faces becoming clearer. One of them had eyes that glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. Another had a mouth that stretched too wide, its jagged teeth bared in a grotesque grin. "They're always looking for a way through," Mark said. "You gave them one." I stumbled back, nearly knocking over one of the candles. "What do I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "You have to send them back," Mark said. "Close the door before they—" He stopped, his eyes darting to something behind me. "Before they take you," he finished, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. The living room was empty, but the air felt colder, sharper, like it was charged with static. And then I saw it. A shadow moved across the wall, slithering like smoke, even though there was nothing there to cast it. The reflection in the mirror flickered again, and Mark's face was replaced by one of the shadowy figures. Its features were vague, like a smudged drawing, but its eyes locked onto mine. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, its movements slow and deliberate. When it spoke, its voice was layered, like multiple people talking at once. "You called us," it said, "and now we're here." The candles went out all at once, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the dim glow of the screen barely cutting through the shadows. "Mark," I called out, my voice shaking. "Are you still there?" For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then faintly, I heard his voice again. "Don't let them in." The mirror began to vibrate, the surface rippling like water in a storm. The shadows in the glass surged forward, their faces pressing against the surface, their mouths moving as if they were screaming, but no sound came out. I grabbed the obsidian stone, clutching it tightly in my hand. The guide hadn't said anything about this. It hadn't warned me what to do if something went wrong. "Close the door," Mark's voice repeated, louder this time. "How?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Break the connection," he said. "Destroy the anchor." I looked down at the stone in my hand, my grip tightening. If this was the anchor, destroying it might stop whatever was happening. But as I raised the stone, ready to smash it against the floor, the shadows surged out of the mirror. They moved like smoke, twisting and coiling through the air, their forms barely solid. One of them brushed against me, and the air around it was freezing, so cold it burned. I stumbled back, dropping the stone. The shadows closed in, circling me, their voices a deafening cacophony of whispers. "You can't stop us." "You opened the door. We'll never leave." Mark's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "Do it, now." I grabbed the stone off the floor, my hand trembling as I raised it again. The shadows lunged, their faces contorting with rage, but before they could reach me, I slammed the stone against the edge of the coffee table. It shattered with a sharp crack, fragments scattering across the floor. The room went still. The shadows froze, their forms flickering like a glitching video. Then one by one, they dissolved, melting into the air until the living room was empty again. The mirror went dark, its surface smooth and reflective once more. The candles were out, their faint trails of smoke curling upward in the silence. I collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Mark's voice came one last time, faint and distant. "You closed the door. Don't open it again." And then he was gone. I haven't touched the guide since. It's still sitting in my email, buried under a dozen other messages I don't have the courage to delete. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear faint whispers coming from the living room. But I don't look. I can't, because part of me wonders if the door isn't fully closed, and if I look, I might find it open. For the next few days, I did everything I could to convince myself it was over. I threw away the shattered pieces of the obsidian stone, deleted the guide from my email, and avoided looking at the mirror altogether. I even slept with the lights on, like some scared little kid. But the thing is, it didn't feel over. The living room felt different, heavier somehow, like the air itself had been changed. Every now and then I'd catch a faint flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. And then there were the sounds. Late at night, when everything else was still, I'd hear it. A soft whisper, too faint to make out. It was just loud enough to make my skin crawl, like someone was standing right behind me. One night I woke up to find my bedroom door open. I always close it before bed, always. But now it was open, just a crack, enough for the hallway light to spill through. At first I thought maybe I'd left it open by accident, but when I got up to close it, I saw them, faint footprints, dark smudges leading from the hallway to the living room. I froze, my hand gripping the doorknob so tightly it hurt. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call someone, anyone. But what was I supposed to say? Hey, I think the ghost of my dead friend invited some shadow monsters into my house. The footprints were faint, but they were there, each one more defined than the last, as if someone, or something, had been pacing through the house. And then I heard it again, the whisper. This time, it was louder. "Open it!" I followed the footprints into the living room, my heart pounding with every step. The mirror was still there, propped up on the coffee table like I'd left it. But now, there was something wrong with it. The surface was smudged, like someone had pressed their hands against it from the inside. "Mark," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The whisper came again, clearer now. "Open it." I stepped closer, my breath fogging up the glass. For a moment I thought I saw something, a face, faint and blurred, staring back at me. But it wasn't Mark. The face was wrong. It was pale and featureless, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck in the light. Its mouth was stretched into a grin that didn't reach its eyes. I stumbled back, my chest tightening as a cold wave of dread washed over me. The whisper came again, louder this time, almost desperate. "Open the door." The mirror began to vibrate, its surface rippling like water. The smudges grew darker, spreading outward until the entire mirror was black, like a pool of ink. I should have left. I should have run, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my body frozen as the blackness began to spill out of the mirror, pooling onto the floor like smoke. The whisper changed, turning into a low, guttural growl. "You let us in. Now finish it." The black smoke coiled around me, cold and suffocating. My vision blurred, and for a moment I wasn't in my living room anymore. I was standing in a dark, endless void, the ground beneath me, slick and cold. Shadows moved in the distance, their forms shifting and writhing like living ink. And then I heard it, Mark's voice. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice echoing in the darkness. "It's not me. It was never me." "Mark?" I called out, spinning in circles, searching for him. "Where are you?" "You have to close it," he said, his voice growing fainter. "Before it's too late." The shadows began to close in, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes. Too many limbs, too many faces, all of them grinning with sharp, jagged teeth. "You brought us here," one of them hissed, its voice like nails scraping against metal. "And now you'll stay." I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, pulling me down. I screamed, kicking wildly, but the shadows only tightened their grip. "Mark," I shouted, "what do I do?" His voice came one last time, faint and broken. "The mirror. Break the mirror." I snapped back to reality, gasping for air. The living room was spinning, the black smoke still swirling around me. I turned to the mirror, its surface now completely black, like a portal to somewhere I didn't want to go. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy book from the coffee table, and hurled it at the mirror with all my strength. The glass shattered, shards flying everywhere, and the black smoke vanished instantly. The room went silent. For a long time, I just sat there on the floor, staring at the broken pieces of the mirror. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight finally gone. But as I cleaned up the shards, I noticed something. One of the larger pieces still had a faint smudge on it, like a fingerprint, and when I looked closer, I saw it. A face. Not marks. Something else. Something still watching. I didn't sleep that night. After shattering the mirror, I sat on the couch with every light in the house on, clutching a kitchen knife like it would somehow protect me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd let into my home wasn't gone, not entirely. The shard with the smudge haunted me. I'd left it on the coffee table, but no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I kept glancing at it, expecting the face to move. It didn't, but the smudge never faded, even when I wiped it with a cloth. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, lack of sleep, grief over Mark. It all added up, right? I gathered the broken pieces of the mirror into a box, shoved it in the closet, and tried to move on. But the house felt different. It started with small things. My phone's battery drained unusually fast, even when it wasn't in use. Lights flickered more than they should have, even with new bulbs. And then there were the noises, soft creaks and faint whispers, just quiet enough to make me doubt myself. But the real turning point came 3 nights later. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something tapping. At first I thought it was coming from the window, but when I sat up and listened, I realized it was coming from inside the house, specifically from the closet where I'd stored the mirror shards. My heart raced as I got out of bed, the tapping growing louder with every step. When I reached the closet, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Don't open it," I whispered to myself, but the tapping didn't stop. Finally, I swung the door open, half expecting to see something lurking inside. But there was nothing there, just the box with the shards, sitting on the floor where I'd left it. I stared at it, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The tapping had stopped, but the air in the closet felt colder, heavier. Slowly, I reached for the box, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. The shards were exactly as I'd left them, except for one. The largest piece, the one with the smudge, was vibrating. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the box. The shard's surface rippled, like the glass was melting, and the smudge spread, darkening until it covered the entire fragment. And then I saw it. The face. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't human. The thing staring back at me had hollow eyes that seemed to pull me in, and a mouth that twisted into a grin far too wide for its face. "You didn't close the door," it said, its voice low and guttural. "You only shattered the frame." The shard slipped from my hands and hit the floor, the sound echoing in the small space. The face didn't fade. It only grew clearer, its features contorting as the thing inside pressed closer to the surface. "Let us in," it hissed. "You know you want to." I slammed the closet door shut and backed away, my chest heaving. I didn't care if it was in my head or if I was losing my mind. I needed help. But who do you call for something like this? A priest? A psychic? The Ghostbusters? My mind raced as I grabbed my phone, scrolling through contacts, hoping for some kind of epiphany. That's when I remembered the guide. I deleted it, but maybe, just maybe, it was still in my email's trash folder. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room, and searched through the deleted messages. It was there. I opened the guide, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the instructions. This time, I wasn't looking for how to summon a spirit. I was looking for a way to undo everything. At the very bottom of the guide, in fine print I hadn't noticed before, was a section titled Closing the Connection. It wasn't long, just a few lines. If the connection persists after the ritual, all remnants of the anchor must be destroyed completely. Failure to do so may result in permanent breaches. The shards. I hadn't destroyed them. I grabbed the box from the closet, my pulse racing. The largest shard was still vibrating, the face inside twisting and snarling as I carried it to the kitchen. I dumped the shards into the sink and grabbed a hammer from the drawer. "You can't stop us," the face hissed, its voice echoing in my head. "You opened the door. You invited us in." I didn't respond. I raised the hammer and brought it down as hard as I could. The first strike cracked the largest shard, sending splinters of glass flying. The face contorted, its grin twisting into something more animalistic. "No," it growled. "You can't." I struck again and again, each blow reducing the shards to dust. With every hit, the room grew brighter, the oppressive weight lifting until the air finally felt normal. When I was done, I swept the glass into a bag and tossed it outside in the dumpster. The house was silent, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in days. For the first time I felt like I could breathe again. That night, I slept without the lights on. I didn't wake up to whispers or tapping or shadows moving in the corner of my eye. But as I lay there, drifting off, I thought I heard a faint voice, just for a second. "You didn't close the door." I haven't heard anything since. The house feels normal again, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Every now and then I catch myself glancing at the spot where the mirror used to be, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. And sometimes, late at night, I think about Mark. I wonder if he was ever really there, or if the thing in the mirror was lying the whole time. Because if it wasn't Mark, then who did I call? And who else is waiting on the other side? For days I tried to convince myself it was over. The shards were gone, the whispers had stopped, and the house finally felt normal. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. It was subtle at first. I'd hear faint creaks in the middle of the night or feel the air grow cold in certain rooms. I told myself it was just paranoia, leftover fear from everything that had happened. But then, I started noticing the mirrors. The first time was in the bathroom. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection like I always do, when I saw it, just for a second, a shadow, faint and indistinct, flickering across the surface of the glass. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was nothing behind me. When I looked back at the mirror, it was normal, just my reflection, staring back at me with wide, tired eyes. It happened again the next day, this time in the hallway mirror. I was walking past when I saw something move, a dark shape, darting just out of view. I stopped and stared at the glass, waiting for it to happen again. The hallway behind me was empty, the light fixtures flickering faintly, but then my reflection smiled. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My face in the mirror was smiling, but I wasn't. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion, or my brain playing tricks on me. But then my reflection tilted its head, the grin widening into something unnatural, something that didn't belong on my face. "Why are you still here?" it whispered. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through me like a knife, low and guttural, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside the mirror. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and threw it over the glass, covering the reflection. For the rest of the day, I avoided every mirror in the house. That night, I dreamed of Mark. We were sitting in his old car, the one he had before the accident. The radio was playing softly, and everything felt normal, until he turned to look at me. "You didn't close it," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I did," I told him. "I broke the mirror. I destroyed the shards." Mark shook his head. "It wasn't just the mirror. It's still open." "What is?" I asked, my chest tightening. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to look out the window, his expression dark. "They're still here," he said quietly, "and they're waiting for you." I woke up, drenched in sweat, Mark's voice echoing in my head. "They're waiting for you." The house was dark and silent, the air thick with a sense of dread. I tried to shake the dream off, but it clung to me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. And then I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the living room. I grabbed my phone and crept down the hallway, every shadow stretching and twisting in the dim light. When I reached the living room, I stopped. The mirror was back. It was the same mirror I'd shattered, perfectly intact, sitting on the coffee table as if it had never been broken. My legs felt like jelly as I stepped closer, the tapping growing louder. The surface of the mirror was dark, rippling like black water, and the smudge was there again, spreading outward like ink bleeding through paper. This time, the face in the mirror wasn't distorted. It was mine, but it wasn't me. The reflection stared at me, its hollow eyes gleaming with something that wasn't human. "You can't run from us," it said, its voice a twisted echo of my own. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The reflection held my gaze, its grin widening into something impossibly large. "You let us in," it continued, the words dripping with malice. "And now, you're ours." The black surface of the mirror rippled violently, the edges of the glass cracking as if something was trying to break through. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The reflection leaned closer, its face pressing against the glass. "Everything." The lights in the room flickered, and the air grew colder, thick with the smell of burnt metal. The tapping turned into a loud, relentless pounding, shaking the walls. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a decorative vase, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, but instead of falling to the floor, the shards hung in the air, suspended like frozen droplets of water. And then they started to move. The shards spun wildly, forming a swirling vortex of jagged glass. The black smoke seeped out from the center, twisting and writhing as it filled the room. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices overlapping and echoing. "You belong to us. You can't escape. It's too late." I grabbed the obsidian stone, or what was left of it, from the drawer where I'd stashed it after smashing it the first time. I didn't know if it would work, but I clutched it tightly and screamed, "Leave me alone!" The vortex slowed, the smoke retreating as the voices grew quieter. The shards fell to the floor, scattering across the room like broken stars. And then, silence. When I looked around, the mirror was gone. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight finally lifting. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. I've since covered every mirror in my house, afraid of what I might see if I looked too long. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I catch a faint reflection in the window. It's not my face staring back. It's waiting, and I don't think it's done with me yet. I found a dark web stream of a haunted forest. The camera was pointed at my tent last night. I should have known better. I mean, people don't just stumble across the dark web without trying, right? But I wasn't trying, not exactly. It started as a stupid late-night rabbit hole. One minute, I'm watching true crime videos, and the next, I'm reading about how to access the hidden internet. I didn't actually think I'd get there. It was one of those, it's not that serious kind of things. But curiosity is a nasty little habit, and by the time I downloaded the necessary tools and typed in some sketchy links I found on forums, I was in. Most of it was garbage. Outdated pages, weird code, marketplaces selling things I didn't even want to think about. But then I found something. It was called the Hollow Feed. The name was vague, and the link was buried in a thread titled Streams You'll Never Forget. I should have taken that as a warning, but instead I clicked. The page was simple. A black background with a single live video feed. The title below it read, Live the Haunted Hollow. At first it just showed trees, dark, twisted trees, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The camera was stationary, set up in the middle of what looked like a forest. It was hard to tell where, though. There weren't any landmarks, just a blanket of fog and the faint sound of wind rustling through the leaves. It wasn't scary, not yet, just eerie, like the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie. I was about to close the tab when something moved. It was subtle, a quick flicker of motion near the edge of the screen. I leaned in closer, trying to make it out, but whatever it was had already disappeared into the shadows. I kept watching, my curiosity getting the better of me. After a few minutes, the chat box at the bottom of the screen lit up. Anonymous 01. Did you see that? Watcher 666. It's getting closer. Closer to what? I thought. For the next hour, I couldn't look away. The feed was hypnotic in a way I can't really explain. Nothing much happened. Just the camera slowly panning left and right, showing more of the same foggy forest. But every so often there'd be movement, a shadow darting between the trees, a branch snapping off-screen. The chat kept buzzing with cryptic messages. Forest dweller, it always starts small. Just run. Wait until midnight. Anonymous 02, it's already watching you. At first I thought it was just some kind of viral marketing stunt. You know, like those fake horror games designed to freak people out. But as the night went on, it started to feel different. Around 2 a.m., the camera stopped panning. It locked onto a specific spot in the forest, a small clearing with a tent pitched in the center. My tent. I didn't realize it at first. I just stared at the screen, trying to figure out why the setup looked so familiar. The fog, the trees, the way the ground sloped slightly to the right. It was identical to where I'd gone camping the night before. But that wasn't possible. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Forests look alike, right? And it wasn't like I was the only person who ever camped. Still, something about it felt wrong. I leaned in closer, squinting at the screen. The tent was the same dull green as mine, with a frayed edge on the left side, where my dog, Scout, had chewed on it last summer. That's when my stomach dropped, because Scout's leash was tied to the tent pole, and Scout was inside the tent. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Maybe someone had found a stock image that looked like my tent. Or maybe I'd left my camera on at the campsite, and someone hacked it. Though how they'd managed to set it up perfectly like that, I had no idea. I paced around my apartment, trying to calm myself down. It was probably nothing. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Finally, I caved. I grabbed my keys and headed back to the campsite. The drive was nerve-wracking. The road to the campsite was pitch black, and every shadow seemed to move in the corner of my eye. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot, I was shaking. When I reached my tent, everything looked normal. The tent was still standing, and Scout barked happily when he saw me. But as I looked around, my unease grew. There were footprints. They weren't mine. The prints were larger than any shoe I owned, and the stride was longer too. They circled my tent, over and over, stopping right in front of the flap, and then they disappeared. Not like someone had walked away, more like they'd just stopped. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind rustled through the trees, and an owl hooted in the distance. But underneath it all, I swore I could hear something else. Breathing. I didn't stay to find out who or what had been there. I grabbed Scout, packed up my gear as quickly as I could, and got out of there. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop, hoping the feed would be gone. It wasn't. The camera was still locked on the clearing, but the tent was gone. In its place was a single word scrawled into the dirt: run. I don't know what's happening. I don't know who's behind the stream or how they found me. But I have a feeling this is just the beginning. There's more I need to explain, but I need to collect my thoughts first. If anyone has seen something like this, let me know, because I'm starting to think that whatever's in that forest isn't done with me. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every sound outside my window felt amplified. The hum of passing cars, the distant bark of a dog, even the creak of the apartment building settling. My mind kept going back to the stream, to the footprints around my tent, and most of all, to that single word scrawled in the dirt: run. I wanted to convince myself it was some elaborate prank, but deep down, I knew better. The problem was I couldn't make sense of it. How did someone find me out there in the middle of nowhere? How were they streaming it in real time on some creepy dark website? And why me? I spent the early hours of the morning staring at my laptop, trying to decide if I should open the stream again. My gut told me to leave it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. It always does. When I finally clicked back onto the link, the screen loaded slower than usual, the spinning icon dragging on forever. For a second, I thought the site had gone offline. I almost felt relieved, but then the stream came up. The camera was still fixed on the forest clearing. My tent wasn't there anymore, but the footprints remained, faint in the dirt, but unmistakable. The chat was active again, the same cryptic usernames popping up. Anonymous01, it's moving closer. Forest Dweller, it doesn't stop until it finds what it's looking for. Watcher 666, they always come back. I typed into the chat for the first time, my fingers trembling on the keyboard. Me, who are you? What is this? For a long time, no one responded. The camera continued to pan slowly across the clearing, showing nothing but trees and fog. And then a new message appeared. The hollow, you were chosen. My breath caught in my throat. The name wasn't like the others. It wasn't anonymous or playful. It was specific. It felt intentional, like whoever was behind the site had been waiting for me to ask. Me, chosen for what? There was no reply. The chat went completely silent, but the camera kept moving. I leaned closer, watching as it panned to the left, then the right, before settling on something in the distance. A figure. It stood at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible through the fog. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a tree or a shadow that looked vaguely human. But as the camera zoomed in, the figure became clearer. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long. It didn't move, didn't sway with the wind like the trees around it. It just stood there, perfectly still, facing the camera. The chat came alive again. Forest Dweller, it's here. Anonymous 02. You shouldn't have come back. The hollow, it sees you. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart racing. I couldn't do this anymore. Whatever game this was, I wanted no part of it. But then my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was a notification, an email maybe, or a text from a friend. But when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The message wasn't from anyone in my contacts. It wasn't even a number I recognized. It was from the hollow. The message was short. Look outside. I froze, my hands gripping the phone so tightly I thought I might crack the screen. I didn't want to look. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay where I was, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But curiosity, and maybe fear, got the better of me. I crept to the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I peeked through the blinds. At first I didn't see anything. The street was empty, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. Standing under the nearest streetlight was the figure from the stream. It didn't move, just stood there, its head tilted slightly, as if it were listening for something. The shadows cast by the light seemed wrong, stretching out too far, too sharp. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a coincidence, a trick, a prank, something. But then my phone buzzed again. You can't hide. I dropped the phone, the screen cracking as it hit the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears, my chest tight with panic. I grabbed my keys and bolted. Driving didn't help. No matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The roads were eerily empty, the shadows on the side of the highway too long, too dark. I finally stopped at a gas station miles from my apartment, pulling into the brightly lit lot. The fluorescent lights overhead felt like the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to calm down. I told myself it wasn't real. Maybe I was sleep-deprived. Maybe I'd just let the internet get to me. But when I looked up, my stomach dropped. In the distance, at the edge of the gas station lot, the figure was there. It was closer now, standing just outside the circle of light, its long limbs barely visible in the shadows, and it was looking right at me. I don't know what it wants or why it's following me, but I can't keep running. I need to figure out what this is before it's too late. I stayed in my car for hours, parked under the gas station's buzzing lights, too afraid to move. The figure hadn't come closer, but it hadn't left either. It just stood there, shrouded in the darkness beyond the lot, waiting. I tried calling the police, but the dispatcher brushed me off. A strange man standing in the shadows wasn't exactly a high-priority emergency, especially when I couldn't explain how I knew he'd been following me. After a few hollow reassurances that they'd send someone out, they hung up. Nobody came. By 4 a.m., exhaustion won out over fear. I needed to leave, but I couldn't go home. I needed somewhere bright, somewhere crowded. The only place I could think of was the 24-hour diner on the edge of town. I pulled out of the lot, my eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. But I didn't feel alone. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. A bored waitress refilled coffee cups for a pair of truckers while the cook, a gruff-looking man in his 50s, flipped pancakes behind the counter. I chose a booth near the back, facing the window so I could keep an eye on the parking lot. The waitress came over, chewing gum lazily as she took my order. "Rough night?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance. "You have no idea," I muttered, glancing nervously outside. She left without pressing further, and I stared down at the menu, pretending to read it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. That's when I noticed my phone buzzing. I hadn't picked it up since the cracked screen incident, but now it was lighting up on the table, vibrating insistently. I hesitated before flipping it over. A new message. "You didn't look close enough." The words sent a chill down my spine. Look close enough at what? The stream? The clearing? The figure? My mind raced, but before I could make sense of it, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a link. The same link to the hollow feed. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding. I didn't want to open it. I shouldn't open it. But my fingers moved on their own, tapping the screen despite the warning bells blaring in my head. The stream loaded instantly. The camera was pointed at a familiar scene, the diner. The shot was angled from the parking lot, showing the fluorescent lights and the large glass windows. Through those windows, I could see myself sitting in the booth, staring at my phone. I froze, the blood draining from my face. This wasn't possible. There was no one in the lot when I arrived, no cameras that could have captured this angle. And then the camera began to pan. It moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the parking lot before stopping on a shadowy figure standing near the edge of the light. The same figure I'd seen outside the gas station. It wasn't standing still this time. It was moving toward the diner. I jumped out of the booth, nearly knocking over my coffee cup. The waitress gave me a startled look as I bolted for the door. "Everything okay?" she called after me. "No," I muttered, shoving the door open and stepping outside. The parking lot was empty. I spun around, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, but there was no sign of the figure. The air felt heavy, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. And then I noticed something strange. The diner's large windows reflected the parking lot, but in the reflection, I wasn't alone. Behind me, standing just a few feet away, was the figure. I whipped around, my heart hammering, but there was nothing there. The lot was as empty as before, but the reflection didn't lie. I stumbled back into the diner, slamming the door shut behind me. The waitress stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You okay, man?" I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the window, on the reflection of the figure still standing there, unmoving. I grabbed my phone and reopened the stream. The feed now showed the interior of the diner. The camera focused directly on my booth. The chat lit up with new messages. "Watcher 666, it's closer now." "Forest dweller, it won't leave until you understand." "The hollow, look behind you." I didn't dare turn around. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. When they came back on, the diner was silent. The waitress was gone. So were the truckers and the cook. The hum of conversation, the clinking of plates, all of it had vanished. The only sound was my own breathing. And then, from somewhere behind me, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. I turned slowly, my chest tight with fear. The figure was standing at the far end of the diner, its long limbs casting jagged shadows across the walls. Its head tilted slightly as it took a step closer, the sound of its movements unnatural, like the crunch of leaves underfoot. I backed away, my phone slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The figure stopped, its eyeless face turning toward me. Then it spoke, not aloud, but directly into my mind, its voice cold and hollow. "You shouldn't have watched." I don't know how I made it out of there. The next thing I remember is being back in my car, speeding down the highway, the lights of the diner fading into the distance. But the voice hasn't left me. It whispers to me in the quiet, reminding me of the stream, of the things I saw in that forest. And I have a feeling it's not done with me yet. I don't remember driving home. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they ached, and my eyes flicked constantly between the road and the mirrors. Every dark stretch of highway seemed alive, and every shadow felt like it was about to reach out and grab me. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, staring at the reflection in the rearview mirror. I half expected to see the figure sitting in the back seat, waiting, but it wasn't there. Still, the feeling lingered, that crawling sensation you get when you know you're not alone. The apartment felt wrong when I stepped inside. It wasn't just quiet. It was too quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The faint hum of my fridge, the distant sounds of traffic outside, even the soft creak of the floor under my weight. It all seemed muffled, distant, like I was hearing it through water. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint at first, like damp earth and rotting leaves, but it grew stronger as I moved further inside. By the time I reached the living room, it was overwhelming, choking the air like the forest had followed me back. Then I saw the footprints. They started at the front door, muddy impressions that trailed across my carpet and disappeared into the hallway leading to my bedroom. My heart sank as I stared at them. They weren't mine. The prints were too large, the stride too long, and worse, they weren't consistent. Some were clear, detailed impressions of a boot or shoe. Others were wrong, barefoot, but stretched and distorted, with long, claw-like toes. I didn't want to follow them, but I had to know. I crept down the hallway, each step slower than the last. The prints led straight to my bedroom, where the door was slightly ajar. The smell was strongest here, and I could feel the air grow colder with each step. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pushed the door open. The room was empty. At least that's what I thought at first. My bed was untouched, my dresser undisturbed. But as I stepped inside, I noticed the window. It was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the cold night air. I didn't leave it like that. I moved to close it, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the latch. That's when I saw it. A single muddy handprint smeared across the windowsill, and just below it, scratched into the wood, were 3 words: "Stop watching me." I barely slept that night. I barricaded the window and sat in the corner of the living room with every light in the apartment turned on. The hours dragged by, each minute feeling heavier than the last. By the time morning rolled around, I thought I'd finally caught a break. The sunlight streaming through the blinds felt like a small victory, a tiny piece of normalcy. But when I picked up my phone, my stomach dropped. There was a new notification. The app wasn't one I recognized, just a black square with no name. The message simply said, "New feed available." Against every instinct, I tapped it. The screen went black for a moment before loading a live feed. This time, it wasn't the forest. It was my apartment. The camera was angled high, like it was mounted in a corner of the ceiling. It showed me, sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. I jumped up, my heart pounding. My eyes scanned every corner of the room, looking for the camera. It had to be a trick, some kind of sick game. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find anything. The feed kept playing. I watched as the version of me on the screen stood up and began searching, mirroring my every move. But then something changed. The figure appeared. It stepped into frame from somewhere off-screen, its movements slow and deliberate. On the feed, it stood behind me, its head tilted at that same unnatural angle. I spun around, my pulse racing, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the feed, the figure was closer now, its long, thin arms stretching toward the me on the screen. And then the feed cut out. I threw my phone across the room, the screen cracking as it hit the wall. This wasn't just a game or a prank. It was something else, something worse. I grabbed my keys, ready to leave, but when I opened the door, I froze. A package sat on the floor outside, wrapped in plain brown paper with no markings or return address. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and brought it inside. Inside was a single object, a camera. It was old, the kind you'd see on security systems from the 90s, with a cracked lens and frayed wires. Taped to the side was a note, scrawled in messy handwriting. Put it back. I didn't know what it meant, or where the camera had come from, but the implications made my stomach turn. Something wanted me to return it, but to where? And what would happen if I didn't? I don't have answers yet, but I'm starting to think that this isn't just about the stream. It's about whatever I've disturbed, and I don't think it's going to stop until I fix it. I stared at the camera for what felt like hours. The cracked lens seemed to watch me back, its jagged surface almost alive. The note, "Put it back," played on repeat in my mind. Back where? Back in the forest? Back to whoever, or whatever, sent it to me. I didn't know, but something told me the only way out of this was to follow the trail back to where it began. It took me until nightfall to work up the nerve to go. I packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and a knife. Not that I thought they'd help if it came to that. I just needed something to hold, something to make me feel like I wasn't walking into this empty-handed. The drive to the forest was quiet, the kind of silence that's louder than noise. The roads were empty, the air outside my car heavy with humidity and the faint smell of rain. By the time I reached the trailhead, my hands were trembling. The entrance looked the same as before, dark, uninviting, with trees that seemed to lean in closer than they should. The path was barely visible under the fog, but I knew where it led. I followed the same route I'd taken when I'd camped there. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the forest itself was pressing down on me. The camera hung at my side, its weight unnatural, almost like it was resisting the trip. When I reached the clearing, everything was wrong. The fog was thicker here, clinging to the ground like a living thing. The air was colder, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. And then there was the sound. At first it was faint, a low hum that I could feel more than hear. But as I stepped further into the clearing, it grew louder, resonating in my chest. In the center of the clearing was a tree I didn't remember. It was massive, its branches bare and twisted, reaching toward the sky like jagged claws. At its base was something carved into the bark, a hollow, just large enough for the camera. I didn't want to move closer, but the hum was unbearable now, drowning out everything else. It pulled me forward, guiding me like a magnet. When I reached the tree, I saw the carvings. They weren't random marks. They were eyes, hundreds of them, etched deep into the bark, each one staring in a different direction. And at the center of them all was a single word: return. My hands shook as I lifted the camera, aligning it with the hollow in the tree. The moment it clicked into place, the hum stopped. For a second, everything was still. And then the forest came alive. The wind roared through the clearing, whipping the fog into a frenzy. The branches of the tree creaked and groaned, their twisted shapes shifting as if trying to pull free from the trunk. And then they came. Figures emerged from the shadows, their long limbs moving unnaturally as they stepped into the clearing. There were dozens of them, each one more distorted than the last, their hollow faces turned toward me. They didn't speak, but I felt their message, their presence pressing into my mind like a weight I couldn't shake. You should not have seen. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a root. The figures didn't follow, but their gazes burned into me, an unspoken warning that I wasn't free yet. The tree began to change. its bark splitting and peeling as the hollow where I'd placed the camera sealed itself shut. The eyes carved into the wood closed, one by one, until the tree was smooth and lifeless. The figures vanished with it, dissolving into the fog like they'd never been there. I ran. I don't know how I found my way back to the trail, but I didn't stop until I was in my car, the engine roaring to life as I sped away. By the time I reached my apartment, the fog had lifted, and the night seemed normal again. The smell of damp earth was gone, and the air felt lighter, but the silence lingered. For the first time in days, I slept. When I woke up, my phone was blank. No notifications, no links, no messages from the hollow. The camera was gone, and the scratches on my windowsill had disappeared as if they'd never been there. I should feel relieved, but I don't, because sometimes, late at night, I hear it, that low hum, faint and distant, like it's calling me back, and I don't think it's finished with me yet. If you ever find yourself wandering the dark web, looking for something new, take my advice. Don't click on the links, because some doors, once opened, don't close again. I found a dark web app that tracks cursed objects. My name just appeared on the list of owners. I don't consider myself one of those deep web junkies. You know the type. People obsessed with finding creepy, illegal, or forbidden stuff online just to say they did. For me, it's always been curiosity. I like weird internet rabbit holes, strange forums, obscure websites, ARGs, things that make you feel like you're scratching the surface of something not meant to be found. But this was different. It started with a message on a tech forum I visit sometimes. Someone had posted a link to a thread with no title, no context, just the word, Nethereye. It had over 100 comments, all deleted, except for the very first one. All owners are connected. Find them. Find it before it finds you. Download here. There was a link below the message. No explanation, no replies, just that ominous description. Normally I wouldn't have clicked something like that, but the post was weirdly hypnotic, and curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. The download was instant. A small, unassuming file called nethereye.apk. It didn't seem suspicious, and I figured I'd check it out on my old burner phone first, just in case. That thing hadn't been connected to Wi-Fi in months, so I wasn't worried about malware. I installed the app, and when it opened, the screen went black, except for a single word. Connecting. For a moment, I thought it wasn't going to do anything. But then a map popped up. Not a regular map either. It was black and white, with a web of pulsing red dots scattered across it. No labels, no street names, just dots. A small box appeared at the bottom of the screen. Choose a region to begin tracking. I hesitated. It looked like some kind of scavenger hunt app, maybe for geocaching or ARG fans. Nothing about it screamed dangerous, so I picked my region, Nevada, where I live, and waited. The map zoomed in. The red dots shrank into clusters, marking locations across cities and rural areas. Then a list of names appeared. Not user names, actual names, real names. Each name was paired with a timestamp and a vague object description. Things like Elliot S., Silver Locket, Unknown Origin, Marissa W., Antique Music Box, Plays Distorted Melody, Henry K., Wooden Mask, Engraved Runes. I felt my stomach twist as I scrolled. It was creepy, sure, but not in an obviously supernatural way. It could have been a hoax or a weird ARG trying to scare people. But the timestamps were current, some from just hours ago. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. My name. It was at the very bottom of the list, highlighted in bold, as if it were just added, Jake R. Leather journal, red binding. My heart dropped. I didn't own anything like that. I didn't even know what it was talking about. Was it a coincidence? Some kind of prank? I stared at the screen, trying to rationalize it. But then the app buzzed, and a new message popped up. Tracking enabled. Find the object before it finds you. I didn't sleep that night. The app stayed open on the burner phone, the map occasionally pulsing like it was alive. My name stayed at the bottom of the list, glowing faintly, taunting me. I checked every corner of my apartment, every drawer, every box, looking for the red leather journal. Nothing. At 3 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the burner phone, threw on a jacket, and decided to go for a drive. Maybe getting some distance from my apartment would clear my head. Big mistake. About 20 minutes into the drive, the app buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, half expecting the map to show nothing new. But my dot, it wasn't on the map anymore. It was in the corner of the screen, moving. Something was tracking me. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road, my pulse pounding in my ears. The map zoomed in automatically, and a new dot appeared directly behind mine, about a mile away. No name, no description, just a single word flashing on the screen, nearby. I floored it. The road was pitch black, lined with empty desert on both sides. No cars, no lights, just the faint hum of my engine and the distant crunch of gravel beneath my tires. I kept glancing at the app, watching as the other dot inched closer, no matter how fast I drove. The burner phone buzzed again, but I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the glow of a gas station ahead. The app buzzed again, more urgently this time. Against my better judgment, I glanced at it. My dot had stopped moving. The other dot, though, was now right on top of me. I pulled into the gas station, breathing hard. The place was empty, its fluorescent lights flickering against the cracked pavement. I stepped out of the car, clutching the phone like a lifeline, and scanned the area. Nothing. I opened the app again and a new message popped up. Object acquired. Stay connected. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down, and there it was. On the passenger seat of my car, a small leather journal, its red binding glowing faintly under the flickering lights. I hadn't put it there. I swear I hadn't. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, my mind racing. It looked old, the leather cracked and worn, with faint symbols etched into the cover. My name was scrawled on the front in messy, uneven letters, Jake R., like someone had scratched it in with a knife. When I finally picked it up, the air in the car felt heavier, thicker. The cover was cold, unnaturally so, and the symbols seemed to shift under my fingers, like they were alive. I opened it. The pages were blank, all except the first one. Scrawled in the same messy handwriting was a single line. Keep it close. It knows when you let go. I threw the journal back onto the seat and slammed the door shut, backing away like it was about to explode. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The app buzzed again, but I didn't look at it. I couldn't. Something moved in the shadows behind the gas station. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A flicker of motion, like someone slipping out of sight just as you turn your head. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. And then I heard it. A soft, scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. The sound was coming from inside my car. For a moment I couldn't move. My eyes locked onto the car, the faint glow of the gas station lights reflecting off the windows. The scraping sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate, as if something inside was taking its time. I gripped my phone tighter, forcing my feet to move. My hand hovered over the car door handle, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run instead. But something about the sound. It wasn't just coming from the car. It was coming from the journal. The app buzzed again in my pocket. My stomach churned as I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A new message had appeared. Do not leave it behind. It will come for you. My pulse raced. I didn't know what it was, but the journal sitting on the passenger seat suddenly felt like a bomb waiting to go off. The symbols etched into its cover seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, like they were alive. The scraping sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, unnatural silence. I opened the car door. The journal was still there, exactly where I'd thrown it. The air inside the car was heavy, suffocating, and colder than it should have been. I reached for the journal, but as soon as my fingers brushed the cover, the air shifted. A faint whisper rippled through the silence, just barely audible. Keep it close. I yanked my hand back, slamming the door shut. My phone buzzed again, and this time, the map reappeared. My dot was still in place, but another dot had appeared just outside the gas station. It didn't move. It just pulsed, slow and steady. Someone, or something, was watching me. I scanned the gas station lot, my heart pounding. It was completely empty. No other cars, no people, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint rustle of the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The app buzzed again. Another message. It will follow. Take the journal. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to leave it, to drive as far away as I could, and never look back. But the pulsing dot on the map hadn't moved, and I couldn't shake the image of whatever was outside, waiting for me to make the wrong choice. I opened the door again, grabbed the journal, and threw it into my backpack. The second it was out of sight, the air in the car lightened, the suffocating cold replaced by a faint hum of static, like a radio searching for a signal. I got back in the driver's seat and floored it. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, the gas station disappearing into the distance. I kept glancing at the app, half expecting the pulsing dot to follow. But it didn't move. It stayed exactly where it was, a lone marker on the map. I tried to convince myself that whatever had happened was over. Maybe the journal was some kind of prank, an elaborate hoax to scare people into thinking they'd stumbled onto something dangerous. Maybe I'd find a group of YouTubers waiting to laugh at me in the morning. But then the app buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't a warning. It was a command. Look in the mirror. My chest tightened as I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a moment I saw nothing but the empty road behind me. But then something moved. It wasn't a car. It wasn't a shadow. It was wrong. The shape in the mirror was human-shaped, but it wasn't a person. It flickered like static on a broken TV, its edges blurry and shifting. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it watching me. The journal in my backpack grew heavy, like it was pulling me backward. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I pressed harder on the gas, trying to outrun whatever was behind me. The shape didn't disappear. It got closer. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking. I parked in the lot, grabbed my backpack, and ran inside without looking back. The journal thumped against my side with every step, its weight unnatural and wrong. Inside, I locked the door, bolted it, and dragged a chair in front of it for good measure. My apartment felt colder than usual, the shadows in the corners darker and deeper. I tossed the backpack onto the couch and sat down, staring at it like it might jump up and attack me. The app buzzed again. This time the message was short. "Open it." "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm not doing this." The journal disagreed. The backpack shifted slightly, the zipper pulling itself open. My breath caught in my throat as the journal slid halfway out, its cover glowing faintly in the dim light. The symbols etched into the leather seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. Another buzz, another message. You already did. I stood up, backing away from the couch, but the journal didn't move again. It just sat there, its cover shimmering faintly, the first page still open to that single, haunting line. Keep it close. It knows when you let go. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my keys, bolted for the door, and ran back to my car. But as soon as I reached it, I stopped dead. The windows were fogged up from the inside, and scrawled across the glass in uneven, jagged letters were 2 words. Too late. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me. The lot was empty, silent. But when I looked back at the car, the fogged-up writing was gone. The journal buzzed in the backpack again. This time, the message wasn't on the app. It was on the next page. I didn't want to look, but the journal was already open, the pages fluttering, as if moved by an invisible hand. The symbols on the cover pulsed faintly, casting strange, flickering shadows across the walls. My chest tightened as I stepped closer, unable to stop myself. The page it had landed on wasn't blank this time. There was a list, simple, handwritten, and terrifying. Rules for ownership. Keep the object close at all times. Do not discard it. Follow all instructions provided by the app. Ignoring them has consequences. Do not show the object to others. It belongs to you now. If you hear scratching, do not investigate. Stay still. Do not fall asleep before midnight. The last rule sent a chill down my spine. Midnight. It was already past 11:30. My gaze darted to the clock on my wall, the red numbers glaring at me like an accusation. I tried to focus, tried to think rationally, but my thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. The app buzzed in my pocket again. Reluctantly, I pulled it out, my hands shaking. A new message had appeared. Rule 4 is active. Do not move. For a moment I didn't understand. The room was silent, the only sound my own ragged breathing. But then I heard it, the faintest scrape of something against the floor. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with each passing second. My stomach churned as the sound moved closer, circling me like a predator. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I froze, clutching the journal to my chest like it was a shield. The room felt darker, the air heavier, pressing against my lungs. The scraping sound didn't stop. It circled the couch, then moved toward the door, then back again, like whatever was making it was testing the boundaries. I kept my eyes fixed on the clock. 11:42. My fingers ached from gripping the journal so tightly, but I didn't dare let go. The sound stopped suddenly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. Then from somewhere just behind me, a voice whispered, "Why aren't you looking?" I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice wasn't human. It was layered, distorted, as though a dozen people were speaking in unison. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to see what was there, but the rules were clear. Don't move. The whisper came again, closer this time. You took it. You have to look. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle in my body locked in place. The minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. The clock ticked to 11:50. The voice grew quieter, fainter, until it was just a memory in the back of my mind. Then the app buzzed again. The sound jolted me like a gunshot. My eyes flew open and I fumbled for the phone. A new message was waiting. Well done. You're still connected. Proceed to Rule 5. I didn't have time to process it. The clock read 11:53. My brain was screaming at me to stay awake. to fight the exhaustion creeping in from the edges of my vision. The journal felt heavier in my hands, its cover warm now, almost alive. I stood up, pacing the room to keep myself alert. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and shift with every movement, twisting into shapes that didn't make sense. The scratching sound was gone, but the silence was worse. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. At 11:58, the app buzzed again. This time the message was different. It wasn't instructions or a warning. It was a question. "Have you seen it yet?" My blood ran cold. Seen what? My apartment was empty. I hadn't moved from the living room since this nightmare started. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place, but everything looked the same, except for the shadows. They weren't moving with me anymore. They were moving on their own. One of the shadows near the window flickered, breaking away from the others. It stretched upward, forming a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, jagged edges. My breath caught as the shape stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't have a face, just a void where one should have been, surrounded by a faint, pulsing glow that matched the symbols on the journal. The app buzzed again. "Do not speak to it." I clamped my mouth shut, backing away as the figure stepped closer. It didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence heavy and suffocating. The glow from the journal intensified, casting strange patterns across the walls. The figure stopped a few feet away, tilting its head as if studying me. Its face, or lack thereof, seemed to shift, rippling like liquid. Then slowly, it raised a hand and pointed at the journal. The app buzzed one last time. Open to the next page. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I flipped the journal open. The next page was blank, but as I stared, words began to appear, scrawled in the same messy handwriting as before. "Midnight approaches. It belongs to you now. You belong to it. Never let go." The figure stepped closer, its hand outstretched. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the couch, clutching the journal to my chest, like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The clock struck midnight. The figure stopped. For a moment everything was still, silent. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the faint hum of the journal in my hands. I thought it was over. I thought I'd survived. But as the clock ticked past 12:01, the app buzzed again. This time, the message was simple: connected. And at the bottom of the list of names, just below mine, a new entry appeared. Unknown, shadow, indefinite owner. I sat on the couch, clutching the journal like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the real world. The air in my apartment felt wrong, heavy with a strange electric charge. My eyes kept darting to the shadows in the corners, watching for any flicker of movement. The message on the app haunted me. Connected. The list of names was still there, glowing faintly on the screen. My name remained near the bottom, and the new entry, unknown, shadow, indefinite owner, seemed to pulse like it was alive. I didn't know what it meant, but I could feel it. Something had changed. I wasn't just connected to the app or the journal anymore. I was connected to it. The journal buzzed in my lap, vibrating like a phone. I flinched, my pulse spiking, and opened it cautiously. Another page had filled itself with writing, the letters jagged and uneven, as if they'd been carved into the paper by an unseen hand. The mark binds you. The shadow follows. Break the rules, and it takes more than the journal. The words blurred slightly as I stared, like the ink was shifting on the page. My throat tightened. The mark. My eyes darted to my hands, then my arms, searching for anything unusual. At first I didn't see anything. but as I pushed up the sleeve of my shirt, I froze. There, on the inside of my wrist, was a symbol. It was faint, almost like a burn scar, and matched one of the etchings on the journal's cover. The mark pulsed faintly, sending a chill up my arm. It wasn't painful, but it felt heavy, like it was anchoring me to something I couldn't see. The app buzzed on my phone, snapping me out of my daze. I opened it reluctantly, dreading what I might see. A new message had appeared. It knows when you're afraid. Stay calm. I wasn't calm. I couldn't be calm. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. The app's map reappeared, zooming in on my location. My dot blinked in the center of the screen, but now there was another dot, pulsing faintly just outside the building. It wasn't moving. It was waiting. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing. I had no idea what to do. The journal's rules were vague at best, cryptic at worst, and the app offered no answers, just more questions. What was the shadow? What did it want? And why had it marked me? The silence in the apartment was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum from the refrigerator made my skin crawl. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed the journal and threw it into my backpack, deciding I needed to leave. Staying here felt like waiting for something awful to happen. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting the shadow to be standing there. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavier, thicker, like I was walking through syrup. My footsteps echoed unnaturally as I made my way to the stairs. The app buzzed again. Do not go outside. I froze mid-step, my heart hammering in my chest. I glanced back at my apartment door, then at the exit to the street below. The dot on the app was still there, pulsing steadily, but it hadn't moved. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I debated what to do. And then I heard it, a faint, scratching sound coming from the bottom of the stairs. The sound grew louder as I crept closer, each step feeling heavier than the last. My flashlight shook in my hand, casting long, jittery shadows along the walls. The scratching wasn't rhythmic this time. It was frantic, like claws scraping against metal. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the scratching stopped. The hallway was empty, lit only by a single flickering bulb, but there was something on the floor, a smear of black, oily substance leading toward the exit. I followed the trail, my stomach twisting with every step. The app buzzed again, but I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. The trail ended at the door. I reached for the handle, but the moment my fingers brushed the metal, the mark on my wrist burned. It wasn't painful, but the sensation was sharp enough to make me pull back. The app buzzed again, and this time I couldn't ignore it. Do not open the door. It's inside. I staggered back, my heart pounding. Inside, my hands trembled as I turned, scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. The shadows stretched unnaturally, pooling in corners where no light should have reached. My breath hitched as I realized one of them wasn't staying still. It moved, inching closer, rising up like smoke. The shadow was tall and impossibly thin, its edges flickering like static. It didn't have a face, just an empty void where one should have been. The pulsing glow from my wrist intensified, and I felt the journal in my backpack grow heavier, pulling me backward. The shadow tilted its head, its formless shape rippling like liquid. It didn't step forward. It didn't need to. The air between us grew colder, sharper, and I felt its presence pressing against me like a physical weight. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. Use the journal. Open it now. I didn't question it. My hands moved instinctively, yanking the journal out of my backpack and flipping it open. The pages glowed faintly, the symbols on the cover pulsing in time with the mark on my wrist. Words scrawled themselves across the page in real time, as though the journal was speaking to me. Speak its name, bind it to you, or let it take you. I stared at the page, my mind reeling. Its name? I didn't know its name. How was I supposed to? The mark on my wrist burned again, and a single word seared itself into my thoughts, unbidden and undeniable. Nishatar. The moment the name left my lips, the shadow recoiled. Its form rippled violently, fragments of darkness breaking off and dissolving into the air. The glow from the journal intensified, and the shadow let out a sound, a low, guttural noise that made my ears ring. Then it was gone. The hallway was silent again, the oppressive weight in the air lifting. I collapsed against the wall, clutching the journal to my chest, my entire body trembling. The app buzzed one last time, and I opened it with shaking hands. Connection strengthened. Your bond is complete. Below the message, my name glowed brighter than before. The shadow's entry was gone, but in its place was something worse. Owner, Nishatar, duration, permanent. I slammed the phone shut, but it didn't matter. The words were burned into my mind. Whatever I'd just done, whatever I'd bound myself to, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. The apartment didn't feel the same when I returned. The walls seemed closer, the shadows longer, stretching in ways that made no sense. It was like the space was watching me, waiting for something I didn't understand. The journal sat heavy in my lap, its cover warm, almost pulsing. The name, Nishatar, played on a loop in my mind, like an earworm I couldn't shake. I didn't want to say it again. The way the shadow had reacted, the way it recoiled like I had power over it, didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a warning. The app buzzed in my hand. Welcome to your bond. The word bond sent a chill down my spine. I scrolled through the app, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the map was empty now. My name was still at the bottom of the list, glowing faintly, but the other dots were gone. Even the new entry, owner Nishatar, had vanished. Instead, there was a timer, 23:59:59. It was counting down. I stared at the timer, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every instinct told me to delete the app, to burn the journal, to find some way to undo whatever I'd done. But the rules were clear. You can't let it go. I flipped the journal open again, hoping for answers. The pages were blank at first, but as I watched, words began to form. They weren't written in the same jagged handwriting as before. These were clean, deliberate, like a voice speaking calmly in my head. You called it. You bound it. Now it serves you, but service has a cost. My throat tightened. What cost? I whispered, my voice trembling. The journal answered immediately. It will protect you, but it will demand from you. When the timer ends, you will know. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the journal shut and threw it across the room, watching it hit the wall and fall to the floor with a heavy thud. The room felt colder immediately, and the mark on my wrist pulsed sharply, like it was angry. A faint whisper curled through the silence, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. Keep it close. I grabbed the journal and shoved it back into my backpack, as if hiding it would make it all stop. The timer on the app continued its slow, relentless countdown, the numbers burning into my mind. 23:47:12. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and tension. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint groan of the building made me jump. The shadows on the walls didn't move this time, but I could feel them watching, waiting. When the sun finally came up, the oppressive feeling in the apartment lifted slightly. I thought about leaving, just packing up and driving as far away as I could. but the mark on my wrist and the weight of the journal in my bag made it clear. There was no escape. The timer ticked on. By the time the countdown reached its final hour, I was pacing the room, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. The app buzzed again, and a new message appeared. Prepare for the demand. The word sent a cold shiver through me. What demand? What was it going to take from me? My mind raced through every possibility, each one worse than the last. The journal sat on the table, closed but humming faintly, as if it was alive. At 000500, the mark on my wrist began to burn. It wasn't sharp or painful, just a deep, insistent heat that spread through my arm like fire. The room grew darker, the shadows deepening until the only light came from the faint glow of the journal and the phone in my hand. The app buzzed one last time. Say its name. I didn't want to. My throat tightened, my lips refusing to move, but the mark burned hotter, the pressure building in my chest, until it felt like I couldn't breathe. The journal opened on its own, the pages flipping violently before landing on a blank one. Words began to scrawl themselves in the same jagged handwriting as before. Say it now. The air in the room shifted. I felt it before I saw it, a presence heavy and suffocating, pressing against me from all sides. The shadows in the corners coalesced, twisting and writhing until they formed a tall, thin figure. It stood there, motionless, its faceless head tilted as if waiting. Nishatar, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The second the name left my lips, the figure moved. It wasn't fast, but its presence filled the room, its edges flickering like static. It stopped in front of me, towering over me, and raised a hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers layered on top of each other, it spoke. What will you give? The question hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. My mind scrambled for an answer, but nothing made sense. Give what? What did it want? I don't know, I stammered. What do you want? The figure tilted its head again, and the journal on the table began to glow. Words scrawled themselves across the pages, fast and frantic. It wants what you value most. Decide, or it will decide for you. My blood ran cold. What I value most? My mind raced. Family, friends, my life. The mark on my wrist pulsed again, and I felt a strange, suffocating weight pressing against my chest. The figure's hand extended toward me, its long, spindly fingers stopping just inches from my face. Decide, it whispered, its voice filling the room. I didn't know what to do. My hands trembled as I opened the journal, staring at the blank page in desperation. My voice cracked as I spoke. Take the connection, the journal. Take it back. The figure paused, its head tilting slowly. For a moment the room was silent. Then it laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down my spine. You are the connection. The figure dissolved into shadows, sinking into the floor and disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The journal slammed shut, the mark on my wrist fading to a faint, pulsing glow. The app buzzed one final time, and a new message appeared. You belong to it now, until another takes your place. The timer reset. 24 மணி முழுவதும்